How's it going? Sullivan Bard here, and welcome to the conclusion of Indiana Jones Month. And now we come to the last movie of the Indiana Jones series. Well, at least for now, of course. And this one, to which, after 10 years of hatred from many people, I, for one, can really defend it. It is the fourth film of the popular adventure series, Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Whew, what a mouthful. Almost as much as the first film's title. In 1957 Nevada, Indy and his partner George McHale, or Mac, are in custody of the Soviet Union when excavating items in New Mexico. The two are taken to Area 51, where a Russian leader, named Irina Spalko, has Indy helping them search for a specimen in the warehouse that's kept inside a magnetic case. But once Indy brings the Soviets to it and they take it, Indy ends up fleeing the scene as Mac betrays Indy and the Russians chase after him. Indy manages to escape but survives an atomic explosion in a blast zone, made up as a small town with mannequins. Yet after discussing his predicament with the Soviets, Mac, Spalko, and surviving the bomb blast to the FBI, Indy returns to teaching at the university, only to be fired when the FBI ransacked his office with a search warrant. Yet a young man named Mutt Williams comes for Indy's help, as a college friend of Indy's named Howard Oxley is in Soviet custody, and Mutt explains about Oxley's fascination with a place called Akator, better known as El Dorado, the lost city of gold, and of a crystal skull that was taken from there. So Indy and Mutt travel to Peru to uncover the mystery behind the crystal skull and finding El Dorado, and soon meet Oxley, who's been driven mad by the skull's power, and even Marion Ravenwood, who turns out to be Mutt's mother, and Spalko happens to run the Soviet expedition for El Dorado. As far as I'm concerned with this film, and its comparison to the predecessors, I feel like this one did a decent job of capturing the spirit of the originals, even though I acknowledge there are some problems with it. First off, let me discuss the things I like about it. Much like Raiders and Last Crusade, it returns to the familiar setup of having Indy as a teacher and having a returning character, in this case Marion Ravenwood. And the film also mentions past moments and characters like the women Indy went with and Marcus Brody and Henry Jones Sr. Of course, both characters have died in between films, as D. Home Elliott did pass away, yet Sean Connery just retired. And you know how Temple of Doom and Raiders had Indy with a partner in the opening who dies before the main adventure? Well, here, that partner becomes a secondary character throughout the film, and is an antagonist, which makes it a neat addition. As well as a lot of callbacks to the original trilogy, which are nice additions, like the Paramount opening logo and the creepy critters, which is almost a repeat and even teases you with a similar one earlier. Plus the Ark of the Covenant makes a cameo in this, the second time it happened with the first being in Last Crusade. Plus with Indy's fear of snakes that range from one snake to a whole pit of them, it's fun to witness again, but now with a bigger snake that he has to face, thanks to Marion and Mutt. And there is a good Star Wars reference in this film, but it's more of a line, which is, "I got a bad feeling about this," which is said by Harrison Ford, of course. And John Williams does a fine job of bringing back familiar cues. Sometimes reorchestrated the theme in a different way, and also created new ones. Although when the alien ship flies off, the music from E.T. can be heard, which is odd yet fitting as it's a Spielberg movie. The action itself is alright. Sometimes it may feel cluttered with the effects mixed into it, but it's all fine. I mean, they're not too engaging as the others, but when they're not heavily bound by the effects like in the warehouse or most notably the jungle, it does seem enjoyable, not to mention legitimately funny on occasion. The effects themselves are neat, but are most of the time overblown. Sure, there are miniatures used, but there are many times when CGI is used. Sometimes it's pretty subtle and hard to tell, while others are very obvious, most notably with the blue screen effects during the jungle chase and the ending where it's not rendered quite well. Then again, some of the blue screen effects are noticeable in the other films as it was made in the 80s. But that's more for the background, and even then they don't hold up too much. Where the effect here is pretty much the whole stage, and this is the late 2000s, and mostly felt like it isn't there. At times it does work, but others just felt weak. Yet the one thing that kind of bothers me is the mystery and story. At first it felt like it was going the El Dorado route of finding the lost city of gold, but as it goes on the mystery becomes too complicated, with talk of the crystal skull's magnetic and mind power, Oriano and the Conquistadors' expedition for El Dorado and their bodies being found, and I know the other films have complicated backstories, but some of it is kept simple and to a minimum.
I mean, I could follow parts of this one, but when the idea of the crystal skull came in and talks of aliens, and the alien skull is crystal, it tends to lose my grip as it combines two unrelated topics into one mystery. And yes, I know the aliens are referred to as interdimensional beings, but come on, they're still aliens, and they look like them. There's no way you can hide that fact. However, with the film taking place in the late 50s, it sort of makes sense as aliens and spacemen were a big thing during that time. But when combined with El Dorado, it just feels like overkill, and it really should stick with the El Dorado plot, and the item should have been more related to where it came from. If the fifth indie film were to set its adventure to finding Atlantis, the artifact should be King Triton's Triton, or something of a similar fashion. Update: I did find out that there is a Dark Horse comic series and a video game of Indiana Jones and Atlantis. So, who knows what the next film will be about. Plus, with it being set in the 50s, it's such a recognizable time period with the fashion, music, Soviets, and the like, and it being all over the place. Where the originals take place in the 30s, yet felt timeless with the exceptions of the vehicles and Nazis.
But my biggest concern is not agreeing with the fans, and even the general public, of this being the worst of the series, to the point of concluding that it never happened. But it did happen to me because I got into the series later on when the movies came out in this DVD collection in 2003. But I can kind of see where they're coming from.
Most of the complaints I hear I do get, but I necessarily don't agree with. One is having Indy's father pass away, which is something people miss. In The Last Crusade, the knight said to not let the Grail pass the seal, or else the power of the Grail will be taken. So when Elsa passed the seal of the Grail, the power of everlasting life, which both Indy and Henry drank from the cup, has vanished. So it makes sense why Henry passed away and even why Indy appears older, which is another criticism, but given the timeline of these movies, it can sort of work as almost 20 years has passed between Last Crusade and this. And of course there couldn't be any adventures in the 40s because of the Second World War happening, and Indy's a part of that. Yet the biggest complaint for the film is what everyone calls nuking the fridge, which is the movie equivalent to jumping the shark. Everyone says nobody can survive that and he should have died. Well, if we can buy falling off a plane and a cliff and a raft, why couldn't we buy this? Okay, this is one part of the film that I really don't mind, and I can buy in some way. Because, one, I didn't laugh at all at how absurd this is. I mean, I kind of chuckled at the rat falling in Temple of Doom because it looked ridiculous, yet I let it pass. 2. Even though the raft is done with no computers at all, the fridge is done with mostly computer, mainly for the fridge and the explosion. But the thing is, it was cooler to watch, and it did lead to a line later on about surviving in a fridge that they were like death traps. 3. Indy could have gotten into the car that drove from the scene, but it was a good thing he didn't, because that same car ended up getting destroyed by the blast radius, and he would have died there. 4. The fridge said on the door that was lined lead, meaning it could have been possible for him to survive, as lead could withstand a bomb blast. But isn't anyone expecting something like this? Aren't you having any fun? What's wrong with having to enjoy all that's in front of you and just escape reality for once? Okay, I'm sorry for that and I apologize. But I for one enjoy watching this film. And at first, I never understood the criticisms behind the film. Maybe it's a case of people growing smarter, or maybe we spend too much time learning what's right or wrong, or we forget how to have fun when going to the movies. But then this is a Lucasfilm production made 3 years after the Star Wars prequel trilogy wrapped up. So I wouldn't blame anyone if that was the case, but I had mixed feelings for the prequels, with Attack of the Clones being my least favorite and Phantom Menace being my favorite. Not to mention that this was Lucas's story and Spielberg originally didn't want to continue making more, let alone do another film with aliens. And yet, like Star Wars, we all wanted another indie film, and Harrison Ford enjoys this character more than Han Solo, to the point of wanting nobody else to play the character except himself. But the fact that fans and sometimes the general public don't have the patience to wait for a new film is what killed it for me. Why is it that people tend to not hype up the film they wanted to see, while at the same time constantly hype up the next Star Wars movie without learning their lesson about the previous film they dislike? But that's another topic. Still, I find this movie to be just as enjoyable as its predecessors. It may go a little overboard in some places, but I had my fair share of fun with this.
And as for the new cast of characters, they did a fair enough job.
Cate Blanchett plays Irina Spalko, Shia LaBeouf plays Mutt Williams, Ray Winston plays Mac George McHale, John Hurt plays Professor Harold Oxley, Jim Broadbent plays Dean Charles Stanforth, and Igor Jimkin plays Dovchenko. As a whole, this movie is enjoyable. The characters are fun, the story is quite interesting, and the effects are a bit overblown, but quite fascinating. In many ways, this film felt like the originals it was going for, being as done by almost the same cast and crew. And while there are times where it's excessive with its mystery and logic, I usually don't mind it as that's what's expected of these films. But while I do get the criticisms behind it all, I don't agree with it being the worst, as I think Temple of Doom is the worst, despite it having good moments. This film still has the same energy, attitude, and adventure as its predecessors, even though it came out years later and everybody says it's too late. But for me, I say it's never too late, and even with news of a 5th movie coming out, I don't mind the wait or what it will be. As long as this film and future ones still carry the same spark, I'll happily enjoy them as the original trilogy. And rest assured, I won't say they never happened.
So today, this movie began a rating of 3 stars. So thank you for joining me. Like, comment, subscribe, follow me on Facebook or Twitter, support me on Patreon, and until next time for a new video.